As writers, we know it's our job to constantly be studying the industry and learning new strategies, tools, and techniques to level up what we're doing inside of our writing, which is why today's guest is so incredibly impressive. We are talking to Stu, who is the creative mind behind some of the movies that we grew up with. You've heard of Land Before Time, Smart House, Zenon, Gotta Kick It Up, Tru Confessions, and so many more. He is the creative writer behind these tales, and he is breaking down everything we need to know that he teaches his students professionally on how they can be writing and leveling up in their writing career as well. So let's dive into the conversation.
Hi, I'm Stu Krieger. I am a screenwriter, a novelist, and a college professor.
And I am so excited because you have written so many of the movies that informed my childhood. Everything from Land Before Time to Smart House to the Xenon movies and so many more. And I'm really excited because today we're going to talk about storytelling. I want to talk about how you've crafted these stories, advice that you have, techniques. I want to go over everything. So just to give people a quick refresher, if they didn't see our last interview, how did you get into the world of creating screenplays and novels?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to be a writer from a very early age. I grew up in Rochester, New York, with no connection to the film business, but knew this is where I belonged in Los Angeles. We made a family trip here when I was 12 years old that only confirmed my suspicion. And I graduated college at 21 and moved to LA and just did everything I possibly could to get a toe in the door. My very, very first job in Los Angeles was at the now defunct Los Angeles Herald Examiner newspaper. So I was hired as a copy boy, but I quickly started hanging around the entertainment department, pestering them until they let me start writing some celebrity interviews and movie reviews. And that was my first published writing, was my byline for the Herald Examiner. And then always at the same time, writing scripts and trying to get an agent that eventually led to my first agent that started my career.
And we know that writing is a process. You start in one place, and as you do more, you understand your craft, you understand your strategy, and you get better as time progresses. So you started off by writing in the paper, you learned from there, and you were able to grow into your screenplays. So let's talk a little bit about your storytelling process. What does it look like for you in the physical world for you to write your stories? Are you in a specific location? Are you using specific tools? Do you have a specific way of going about your story creation before we get into the techniques?
Yeah, I have always had a home office no matter where we have lived over the last 40 years. The office I am sitting in right now, this is a home we've been in for 32 years. So a lot of the movies you mentioned were created right here. But I always had that space. This is my writing space. This is my office. And when my kids were little, first in our other house, it had been the former owner's work shed that we converted into my office. So it was a little separate space in the backyard. And the kids from, birth were basically trained, if daddy's in the box, he's writing. And, and now in my current office where I am right now, the doors are these double pane acoustic, like recording studio style doors. And the code was, if the doors are closed, leave them alone. If they're cracked, you can go say hi. And they were incredibly respectful of it. But then also, because so much of my career was family entertainment, it also meant that I could open the double doors, listen to them playing with their friends, steal dialogue, close the door, and go back to writing. And that was something I did pretty frequently.
I love that. And I love that you kind of used your family to inform what you were doing inside of your writing. I love that you were so protective about your writing time as well. One of the things I talk about a lot on this channel is that you have to treat your writing like a job. If you're not treating it like a job, it's not going to get done. You're going to have distractions. There's going to be things that are calling for your attention, and you're going to put it on the back burner. And so treating it like an occupation is incredibly important to make sure you're growing and you are successful in that storytelling. And so the fact that you treated it like a job, you had specific hours that you worked, and you were protective of the people around you so that you had dedicated time for them and for your writing really speaks to why you were so prolific in the content that you were creating and the movies that you were helping to bring into the world. So when it comes to creating your writing, we talked a little bit about your space, a little bit about how you're protective of your time. I want to talk a little bit more about your strategy. So how do you start telling your stories? Do you have a big overall idea and then you work it backwards? Do you work it forwards? What does that look like for you?
It really depends on the individual project, except I was always and have always been and continue to be a character-driven writer.
Okay.
So I was never, and if you watch kind of the body of my work, you will see that in terms of it's always the characters driving the story rather than the story driving the characters. So I was never somebody with these. I could never write a James Bond movie. I could never write a Bourne Identity movie. It's not the way my brain works. It's not what I do. So, now as a teacher, I rely on with my students the same fundamental, who is your protagonist? What do they want? What's standing in the way of what they want? How far will they go to? All those classic questions. That really always is my launch pad. It's, so thinking about who is that protagonist? Is there an active antagonist or is it an internal antagonist? Who do I need to build the ensemble so that the character is getting either the obstacles or the support they need to be able to go in on this journey? So that's really always my jumping off point, no matter what the story, what the genre is. Who are these people? And I think part of it is, I have a group of very good friends from childhood that we're still in touch all the time, and we Zoom all the time, and we travel together, and our families all know each other. We'll all be together for New Year's Eve this year. And at one point, they were before I had to, make this toe into social media for the new book. They were always banging on me of like, why aren't you on Facebook? And then they would ask about this person or that person that we grew up, and I always knew. And at the end of one of the weekends, one of the guys said, "Well, I know why you're not on Facebook. You are Facebook." And I said, "Well, because, you collect rocks, he collects cars, the other guy makes furniture, I collect people." And it's sort of the friendships that I've maintained over the years, the people that I know, the diversity of who they are and what they do, all of that feeds my work. But I think they're inextricably linked of because I care about people, I can create characters that people care about.
One thing that you mentioned was that you start off with your character and then you look around them. You look for their motives, you look for what they need to go through to get to the end of the story, and you create people around them to either help them or to become obstacles for them. And that's something we don't talk about a lot in the novel writing community. We talk about our character development, we talk about how we're creating those side characters, the people helping them, but not so much in that they could potentially be obstacles or we could be looking at them as a way of supporting our characters. Can you talk a little bit more about your character development and how you build characters around your main characters?
Yeah, one of the things I always say to my students is cast your characters. And by that, I mean, it doesn't have to be, it's going to be Sean Connery. Is it my uncle? Is it my next door neighbor? Is it my son? And a really, really great example of that I can give is I did a project that ended up being an ABC family film called I Do, They Don't. And it was before they did the remake of Cheaper by the Dozen. It was that kind of story, a guy with a bunch of kids marrying a woman with a bunch of kids and trying to
Mhm.
blend the families. And when I was doing the very first draft of it, there was initially 11 or 12 kids. And when I was writing them, I kind of had, I would say 7 of them were really specific. My niece, my nephew, my next door neighbor, whatever. They were very, very specific kids to me. And
Mhm.
then there were 3 or 4 that I just was like, yeah, she's the fat one. She's the smart. I kind of like just was very, very lazy about them. And when the screenplay first went out to the town, there was at least 3 producers that said, 7 of these kids I love. The other 4, I could never keep track of who they were. And I went, busted, you know. And so one of the things when I'm saying that to my students about cast your characters is if you have a really specific vision and voice in your head, then it's really easy to bring them alive on the page. And so, like with Raft, the new novel, one of the characters is 100% my mother-in-law, who has since passed, but she was such a great character with such a wonderful point of view and humor that, as soon as my wife read it, she was like, yeah, that's mom. You totally got it. And so I think that's one of the things that I've always used of making them real to me so they can be real on the page. And then, like you mentioned, in building the ensemble, then, okay, at some point I'm going to need this stumbling block. Who would be the perfect person to do that? Ooh, I know. And the other great power you have as a writer, and it was particularly fun in film, is everybody who ever wronged you, everybody who ever bullied you can make them your bully characters. You can make them your villains. You can make them antagonists in your story. And a lot of times I would even use the names. And it's wonderful, sweet revenge.
I think it's really important to make sure we are having those personal connections to the characters we're writing so that they do not fall flat. In addition to focusing on characters, it's incredibly important to make sure we're also focused on our world building, the environment around us, the things that are going on, the locations. So, what advice do you have for creating the world building around the characters that you're so connected to?
First of all, know what you're writing about. Years and years and years ago, I had a guy from my hometown who sent me a script. I'm thinking of coming to Hollywood. And the script was about a low budget film crew on location. And everything about it was you have never been on a film set in your life. All of the language, all of the how what tasks he assigned to who was, it's like, dude, no, no, you can't send a script to a bunch of people making movies about making movies that you know nothing about. And
Right.
so that's the first thing. And then the other thing is students sometimes will go, my story's set in any town, USA, and I'll go, no, it's not. So, if you are in Cape Cod versus Sacramento versus, the Keys in Florida, those are really different environments that create really different communities, that create really different characters who populate them. No, you know, you need to know where your story is set. You need to know why it's set there. It should not be an arbitrary choice because somebody in Chicago is dealing with weather and things different than somebody in San Diego. No, specific. And the other thing I'm always, always, always yelling at students is the other thing that will happen is the specific becomes universal because what resonates is the truth. And even if it's not your truth, you will respond to something about that rings true to me. I'm relating to it. So drill in, whether it's your characters, whether it's your location, whether it's your plot, authenticity is always going to resonate.
And I'm all about making sure that we help authors to write more authentically on this channel. If you guys have not checked out our Experts for Authors series, we bring on so many different entrepreneurs and industry leaders to help you to write those occupations or locations a little bit more authentically. We'll link that down below for you. And Stu, I know you come from a very strong background in movies in addition to your novels. So what is something that you can take from writing screenplays and give advice to novelists that we might not think of because it is a very different medium?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference between the two is screenwriting and television writing is visual storytelling. So in reverse, sometimes in my classes, I'll get novelists, especially in our grad program, that are, their primary genre is fiction writing, but then they come into screenplay, and I'll say, I have a phrase that they all laugh at because I'll always say, this paragraph is save it for the novel. And then by the second or third week of the class, it'll be STIN, save it, or STIFN, save it for the novel, because it'll be incredibly descriptive, but it's interior. The character is thinking about, that they wish their mother hadn't passed on this day because it's bringing up all, and I go, if you can't show me, don't tell me. So in your script, just save it for the novel. Right now, you got to tell me what I'm seeing on screen. And sometimes, they'll have these incredibly elaborate descriptions. And I'll say, okay, get up and act that for me right now. And they'll go, what? And I'll go, if you can walk across this room, and I'm going to go, oh, I'll bet she's thinking about the fact that her sister has anorexia and she wishes she could be more help to her. If I can see that and you walking, you're good. If I can't figure out a way that you can make that active and verbal and conveyed to a screen audience. So in reverse, sometimes for novelists, it's, take that time, spend more time with that location, spend more time with that feeling, spend more time. And even with Raft, I was really, really lucky to have an incredible editor on it. And one of the things that she said to me in 5 or 6 different places is, you rush this moment, whether it's a comedy moment or a drama moment, slow down, take your breath. Like, we can spend more time here. You can, elaborate a little bit more. You can let us feel this a little bit more. You can let it marinate. You're rushing it. And part of that was the screenwriter in me. It's like, okay, I said it, we got to get going. And she was constantly saying, slow down and spend more time there. So I think that's that really of appreciating being able to look at the moments and spend the time you need.
I love that you pointed out that with screenwriting, if you can't see it and understand, it doesn't belong in a screenplay. It belongs in the novel. And I feel like that can really inform how we're writing in our novels because we do have the opportunity to have that inner dialogue and to slow things down and to really play it out on the page.
Yeah.
But I feel like as we're going through show, don't tell, a great opportunity for novelists would be to look at it as a screenplay, to stand up and to have to actually visibly act out these things to communicate and make sure people can understand it. That can help us to develop what we're doing a little bit more, aside from that internal dialogue that we are creating. Now, you are a prolific screenplay creator. You also have several novels out. So as you're going through the process of creating your novels, what's one thing that you want to really impress on newer or aspiring authors getting into the world of novel creation?
Take your time. One of the beautiful things of this form is it's done when it's done. But anytime it's going to be, I'm giving myself X amount of time to do it, I think you're hamstringing yourself. And so for me, because I am still teaching full time with Raft in particular, the body of the work was done over 3 summers because I don't teach in the summers. But then in between, what was nice is I would have time off to where you always gain objectivity. You can always come back with fresh eyes. And every time that I would come back, it was like, okay, today, and as I mentioned to you earlier, in Raft, there's all 4 members of the family take turns narrating various chapters. And so I would do things like, this week I'm only going to look at Katie's chapters. And if I'm only reading her chapters one after the other, then is there a consistency of voice? Is there language that's specifically Katie language and not mom language or dad language? Those kinds of things. And so being able to then just give yourself permission of, that's what I'm focusing on this week or 2 or 3, whatever it is. But isolating pieces of it, looking at it through a fresh lens, taking that time and really allowing it to marinate and develop, as opposed to when I was in, film and television, it was always with a deadline because the studio needs it by, or this actor, we're going to lose them if we don't have a finished draft in time to shoot on this date or whatever that was. And so part of the joy and luxury of writing prose has been, it's done when it's done.
And because you had so much time in between those summers, you gained that objectivity that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Having that time away has been really, really helpful for me,
Yeah.
especially when I'm editing to catch things that I might not see if I were very close to the content that I was creating. So for you, do you typically like to take a specific amount of time away from your novel after you're done before you jump into editing, or do you just do it as your life allows you to do it?
Mostly as life allows, but like I said, because of the way my life currently is constructed, one serves the other. They kind of naturally evolve in a way that makes sense for it, but there's not a specific, it has to be this amount of time or whatever.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, we've talked a lot about the craft of storytelling, character development, and world building, and I know you teach this professionally. So, before we let you go, I just want to give you free reign to tell us any advice we need to know that you typically give to your students that you found to be very beneficial to them.
Yeah, the most important thing is write. I will have students that come in sometime that are not in my classes currently, but will come into office hours and, hey, I just wanted to pick your brain. And, as you so generously said, it often begins with, I wanted to meet you because you wrote my childhood, which again, there's never going to be a better compliment than that. But they'll, what do you want to do? Well, I want to write. Well, what are you currently working on? Well, I've got some ideas. Then you're not a writer. If you have ideas, you're an idea person. If you're a writer, you write. And one thing that I know, and I know for myself now, 127 years into my career, is every time you write, you get better. You learn something, you discover something, you realize something. I am somebody who has been an inveterate journal writer since I was in my early 20s. And I will have these things that I think are incredible epiphanies about the process or about character, about whatever. And then I will go read a journal from 20 years ago where I wrote the exact same thing. Um, so I think we need to learn and relearn these lessons. But the thing I know above everything else is you're not a writer unless you're writing.
And you can't make it better unless you have something to make it better.
Exactly.
Fantastic. And Stu, you are just a wealth of information and knowledge. Friends, if you have not seen Stu's other episode with us where we talked all about his amazing career, make sure you do. We will link that down below for you. But Stu is also on social media because you are marketing your new book and you've got lots of great stories that you're sharing on your social media pages. So where can everybody reach out to you to learn more?
On Instagram at Stu Krieger and similar handle on TikTok. And as I said earlier, I think there's a Facebook page, which is probably also just Stu Krieger as well. But I'm fortunate that I have a team of folks helping me to curate this just for the balance of life so that it does not become the wormhole it can become otherwise. And we're figuring out as we go.
Hit the subscribe and notification bell because our job here is to help you level up in your writing career. We've got all sorts of masterclasses, we've got interviews with experts, we've got so many people here to help you write more authentically and with strategy and intentionality. And we want to make sure that we're helping you in the best ways possible. So drop any questions you have down below. Let us know what guests you might like to hear from on the screen. And we want to make sure that we're covering topics that are important to you. Drop those down in the comments below, and we'll see you in our daily videos to help you level up in the publishing industry.